former spokesperson for not one, but two Israeli ambassadors to the United Nations, former IDF paratrooper, incredible knowledge, incredible public figure, and has taken time out of his day to come join us. I also have to be honest, he is going to be one of our key speakers at Israel Appreciation Day in September. We are thrilled to have you with us. Daniel, thank you for joining Of the People.
It's a pleasure to be here. Glad to partake in this conversation.
Absolutely.
Hold on. I gotta just start. I don't remember reading the paratrooper part. I obviously missed that. So now I know everything I need to know about you now, Daniel. You are like gonna be a badass. I got it now. Okay. Now we can continue on with all the rest of the questions.
Well, you see, he this is sort of like Clark Kent and Superman. He looks like this mild-mannered guy, but anybody who's a paratrooper jumping out of airplanes, there's, I know we're building you up, right? But I mean, that takes guts to jump out of an airplane. As a friend of mine once said, Daniel, why would you want to jump out of a perfectly good airplane?
Indeed, that's the same thing my mother asked me when I told her not only did I get into the IDF, but I wanted to join the paratroopers. She said, "Why would you want to jump off a perfectly good airplane? And moreover, aren't you afraid of heights?"
Oh, interesting. All right, conquering.
Let me say, I have a comfortable unease with tall places and peering over ledges and such. But beyond that, in short, for me, to join the paratrooper, you get inducted or really drafted into the IDF, and then you have to go through a volunteer process to try out for the paratroopers. So it's not something they conscript you and you go into it. You actually have to volunteer to enlist in it. And I viewed it as a way to be the ultimate soldier, do as much different capabilities as you can while in the IDF. And I was fortunate enough to be selected and then jumped out of planes.
Wow. Amazing. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm sorry if I derailed your conversation there, Robert.
No. So let me ask you. Military service in Israel is compulsory. Military service in this country used to be compulsory, and don't quote me on the year, until 1972 or whatever. What's your perspective on how that makes a difference to sort of sense of nation state or sort of, patriotism or bonding with, one's country? I mean, can you talk a little bit about the difference? Because it's so different here, and I think that makes a huge difference, at least according to me.
Great question.
Yeah, let me just say from the outset, I do not favor a national conscription in the United States. The Selective Service Act, certainly, and we all have to sign up for, at least males, but in terms of national conscription, which is different, I would separate than national service. But a conscription, I'm not in favor of in the United States. Just because Israel's doing it does not mean it works for the United States. And Israel does it mainly because it needs to. It has to. It cannot rely as a small country on a volunteer force, which would make up an even smaller percentage of the population to fight its wars. And this was from day one in 1948, when Israel was established in 1948. It is a citizens' army. On the flip side, here in the United States, we don't need that. We don't face the same kind of immediate threats that Israel faces, particularly on its borders in the region. I mean, Mexico and Canada aren't mounting some sort of invasion of our borders anytime soon. But one thing it does do, and this is why in many ways I'm in favor of a national service, but not national military conscription, is because, Rob, to your point, you serve with people from all over the country. And in many ways, and I'm an American who serves, so people served from people outside the country. But my service, my unit in particular, was incidentally very unique. Many people don't know or don't realize how pluralistic of a society Israel is. In my squad alone, particularly during training, I served with certainly Jews, both religious Jews, observant Orthodox Jews, and secular non-religious Jews. I served with Muslims. I served with Christians. About 2 or 3 weeks ago, the Hezbollah launched an attack on a Druze town in the northern part of the Golan Heights in Israel, killed tragically 12 Druze children. I just want to say I had more Druze commanders than I did Jewish commanders through much of my service. So one thing that national service does do is brings all these disparate parts of a society together to see each other as certainly as equals, but also as parts of a broader and collective whole for which a mission that you are working towards together. And the military certainly does that. And although there is a universal conscription in Israel, Not everyone does serve in the military. There's different carve-outs for various reasons. People can do a national service and not a national military service. So there are pros and cons, but there's no doubt that one way to form a cohesive society that also realizes the broader objective of the national ambition is to have some sort of place or area or service where people are gathering together to achieve that goal. Yeah.
And distinguish for us the difference between national conscription and national service, because I don't think in America we understand the difference. We just assume that the draft is you got to serve 2 years in the military. Are you talking about things in this country that would be like the Peace Corps and other things? What's national? Distinguish the two, please.
Yes. So really, I'm coming from the Israeli perspective. There's something called the Shirut Leumi, which is Hebrew for national service, which is not joining the IDF. It is doing something like, it's not the same, but like Teach for America or like AmeriCorps, which is the domestic version of Peace Corps.
Okay.
And there's also conscientious objectors. There's religious exemptions, which is a big thing politically in Israel right now. But by and large, what I'm trying to distinguish is if you want to serve your country, there's more ways to do it than picking up a gun, than being in uniform. And while Israel compels you to serve your country, it says, for most of you, you're going to do it in uniform. But for others of you, a small percentage, you can do it somewhere else. So what I'm saying is from the American perspective is the holistic idea of serving your country in some capacity, particularly after high school, late teens, early 20s, that time period, I think is something we should really consider here in the United States. But I'm not advocating to go back to the Vietnam War era, even before, of a national conscription. But I think to get our younger generations more engaged in understanding A, of America, and B, of each other in America, it can go a long way to having some sort of service that people have to do, whether it is, Rob, as you mentioned, Peace Corps or AmeriCorps or Teach for America as a private organization, but something like that could be helpful.
I love that you said that, because one of the best things I ever did in my life was move to Texas. I joke that, I'm from the Northeast. I'm from Vermont. It is true that Yankees are a bunch of snobs. Okay. It's true. We think we're better than everybody else. We won the war. Okay. Yeah, we're like that. And so when I was going to move to Texas, I was like, oh, they're all racists and rednecks, because that's what the media told me. And then I got here and I was like, these are the freaking nicest people I've ever met. Right. Oh man, why am I so mad all the time? Maybe I could be a little nicer, And it's just, we don't know each other. We really don't.
Right. And this is particularly, could be a whole other conversation. We're kind of derailing, I think, the plan you had already for this conversation. But just to say, particularly in an era where we are atomized through social media, what better way to get people together, getting younger generations, than seeing each other standing side by side on the front lines or in a classroom or helping build a house in some impoverished community. I think that could go a long way to build social cohesion.
Yeah.
And look, you're not derailing any conversation. This is really what we want to talk about, because part of what we always talk about is, as much as we acknowledge what we call the 3Ds, the demonize, demagogue, demonize, and divide, which I think is a political strategy, right? If you separate Americans from each other, men from women, rich from poor, black from white, find a social fissure that is not being exacerbated. On the other hand, we reject a divided America. Right. We believe in one America. We believe in one people. The question is, to paraphrase, right, how do you put Humpty Dumpty back together again?
Yes.
National service as opposed to a national conscription, because that's all people in this country really, those who recall it at all, recall it as a draft, right? You're going to be drafted into the army, and who went to Canada and who served honor, all those kinds of things. So no, you're not differentiating at all. But I want to jump back to Israel, because what's the mood in Israel? I mean, I know, again, taking off on what Ericka said, I know what the media is telling me, yet I have hundreds of friends in Israel. I have people who go back and forth. And what I'm hearing from them on the ground is not what is being portrayed in the media in terms of the solidarity. It doesn't mean that Israelis don't have their differences. It doesn't mean, the left is the left, the right is the right. And I mean, I get all that. But what do you see on the ground there? What are you hearing in terms of, since October 7th?
Well, there's an adage in the Jewish community, which is 2 Jews, 3 opinions. So imagine a country of 7 million Jews, how many different opinions you're going to have there. And there's 10 million people overall in Israel. The moment right now, let me start now and then back up. The moment right now is one of many people are in suspense. Immediately, Hezbollah and Iran are warning or indicating that they're going to be attacking Israel, which Israel is looking at the potential of a much broader regional war. And I don't want anyone to be under any false pretense. Israel has been at war with the region, can specify who, since October. And frankly, even before that, because the reason there is no peace predominantly with much of Israel's neighbors is simply because there was no peace treaty in 1949 when Israel finally established its borders in its War of Independence. So Israel's been at war with most of its Arab neighbors for the better part of 7 decades. But since October, Israelis kind of realize their predicament in the region, the precariousness with which they find themselves in the region. And one of the reasons this war is being fought is because Israel's fighting most immediately for survival and more broadly in the longer term for its survival in the region in the long run. And there's a few reasons for that. One is most immediately from the military threat. If Hamas can do what it did to Israelis on October 7th, what can Hezbollah do in the north in Lebanon? Hezbollah is a much more powerful enemy for Israel. Israel has viewed Hamas as a tactical threat that can be managed. Hezbollah to the north is a much more strategic threat that presents a existential threat to the state of Israel. And beyond that, Iran, which is Hezbollah's primary proxy, Iran has this ring of fire strategy through this network of proxies that surround Israel from the north onto the east, the south, and the west, and that wants to destroy Israel. So that's the immediate sense from a military perspective, but also more broadly, if we recall in 2020, the Abraham Accords were signed, and the Abraham Accords were peace agreements between Israel, the UAE, Bahrain, and eventually then Morocco came on board and a couple other countries. But a key predicate of those accords, for which we're hoping Saudi Arabia will make peace one day, it's not going to happen despite what people might tell you during this administration. It's just not going to happen, but hopefully in the next administration. The key predicate of that is that Israel can solve these Arab countries' primary military and other threats, mainly from Iran. And if Hamas can do to Israel what it did on October 7th and survive, then what good is the vaunted IDF for Saudi Arabia against the IRGC, against the Iranians? So longer term, Israel's fighting for its place in survival. So Israelis have a renewed sense of purpose in the region, a renewed sense of, frankly, Zionism, which is the Jewish right to self-determine in the land of Israel, in their ancient homeland. Because if Hamas can conduct what it did on October 7th again and again, then what purpose is the state of Israel, which can't protect its own citizens? And beyond that, one war we're not talking a whole lot about is the war in the north with Hezbollah. If there was no war in the south with Hamas and Gaza, we would be calling right now the engagement between Israel and Hezbollah the third Lebanon war, which has been happening since October 8th. Hamas attacked October 7th. Hezbollah joined in the next day on October 8th, in many ways to show solidarity, not with Hamas per se, but with, again, efforts to destroy Israel and to, again, also as an Iranian proxy, to show support for another Iranian proxy that's destroying Israel. So there's been a war there since October 8th. And right now, Israel's facing, getting back to the beginning, the prospect of a much broader engagement with Hezbollah, which has threatened to destroy Israel, also with the Iranians after Israel took out a Hamas leader in Tehran 2 weeks ago now.
Right. So let me jump in, Daniel, real quick, because you just put so much out there for our listeners to digest, which is great. You really, I mean, you have such a grasp of it. But a couple of things. What I'm hearing from you, and if I am misstating, please correct me, that Israel, notwithstanding their differences, has come together by and large as a country because they understand the existential threat of not just the Hamas war, or the attacks from Hamas on October 7th, but the broader regional implications. Correct?
Yeah,
so far?
Yes, very much so.
Okay.
And I want to caveat that real quickly and just say headlines will tell you something else. You said that in your earlier question.
Exactly. And that's one of the things, I mean, we'll do a whole show on my disdain for the journalists in this country and what passes for honest brokers of information.
Journalism.
But don't start me, Ericka. Do not start me on that. But there are no honest brokers. Edward R. Murrow would be rolling over in his grave as far as I'm concerned. But I want to focus on what you brought up with Hezbollah, because Hezbollah on many levels has been called the wild card in this whole military conflict with Israel, because obviously they are the number one proxy for Iran. They have been receiving incredible amount of aid from Iran and weapons for, better part of a couple decades, as far as anyone knows, since the last real war. And yet, like you said, on October 7th, they started launching how many missiles into northern Israel, right, into the Golan and into northern Israel, and nobody seems to really notice. They go, oh, well, Hezbollah's not in this war. Yeah, they are. They've been in this since day one or day two, as the case may be. And I say to my people or my friends, I'm like, imagine, Montreal, Canada, launching how many hundreds of missiles into Vermont. Mm-hmm. How long are you going to take that? So talk a little bit about sort of the Hezbollah factor, because that really is, to me, the wild card. I mean, what I'm hearing is that Hezbollah is going to be engaged to try to sort of soften everything up before Iran decides if they're going to take a direct role in ground ops or otherwise in this. Can you speak a little towards that?
Yeah, so the main thing is no one really knows what's going to be happening. The ball effectively is in their court. It's not to say Israel won't be currently conducting operations against Hezbollah and against the Iranians, both in Lebanon and also in Syria. We're seeing daily reporting of that. But it's important to mention, as we talked about, that Hezbollah started attacking Israel on October 8th. And people should be asking, why is that? It's not that Israel attacked Hezbollah. There's been quiet since 2006, since the Second Lebanon War. Part of my service was spent on the Lebanese border, and it was the quietest border of any border Israel had for the past 16 years until October 8th. So right now, Hezbollah is facing a situation where they have a vast arsenal of rockets and missiles, about 200,000, which is about 5 to 7 times larger than Hamas had before this war. And they respond effectively entirely to the Iranians, to the Ayatollah Khamenei. And if he says, fire even 10% of your rockets or missiles or mortars against Israel, you're talking about 15 to 20,000 of these projectiles coming into Israel, for which Israel has no feasible response. Israel has the Iron Dome, which is really a short-range missile defense or rocket defense battery. It has other capabilities, but by and large, there's no country in the world, particularly Israel, that could defend against that kind of salvo from neighboring states. So that's why Hezbollah presents a strategic threat. And what Israelis are starting to realize is in a war with Hezbollah, I hate to say this, live and on recording, but it's true that if Israel engages a broader war with Hezbollah, then Israelis can expect a different skyline for Tel Aviv. And that's not a war that Israel's been accustomed to fighting since 2006 and really since ever. A lot of the war with Hezbollah was in the north, with wars with Hamas in the past have been the south, but Hezbollah now presents, because it's built up its arsenal the past 17 years by virtue of Iranian supply and training and support, it can target the entirety of Israel. So Israelis are facing a situation where they're waiting for orders. They actually got orders from the government to stock up on certain canned goods and other essentials in the event that the infrastructure or the power grid goes down, and that they have to wait out in bomb shelters for an extended period of time. They're still in this waiting period. Wow. And with every day that goes by, there's a running Israeli joke now that something else might happen or nothing might happen at all. In fact, Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, about a week or so ago, tweeted out that we might attack today, we might attack tomorrow, we might attack next week on Twitter. And to that, Israelis responded, oh, so it's the pizza delivery guy, or oh, so it's Israeli mail, or oh, it's when my ex whatever will get back to me, making jokes at this. Wow. And that's kind of the Israeli mindset. But last thing I'll say about the resilience of Israelis, and you mentioned, what would we do if Montreal was attacking the United States? For one thing, if you were in national service and you lived in Texas, you might not care what happens to the poor residents of Vermont if Montreal is attacking. But if you were serving with someone who's from Vermont, you might then care. And for Israelis, one thing I really appreciate when I serve and I tell people is when Hamas or Hezbollah rockets, even before October 7th, when they launch into Israel, they might not land on your home, but they land on your friend's home or your family's home, or you are 1 degree of separation away from someone's home that they're landing on. And those rockets, those projectiles, they do not distinguish between Jewish homes and non-Jewish homes. So Israelis are really in solidarity with this. There's obviously strong disagreements with the government on both sides of how they're handling hostage negotiations, how they're handling the war in the south, in the north. with Iran. And to be clear, Israel is fighting on 7 different battlefronts actively every day since October.